So fellas, now that we've got 3 Dagestani champions in UFC history, I thought it'd be a good time to rank every Dagestani fighter in history by entertainment. So I've got a tier list, and I'm going to be ranking them from S tier, which are going to be the most entertaining Dagestanis we've ever seen, down to D tier, which is, regardless of if they're Dagestani or not, they need to be cut from the UFC because it's awful to watch these guys perform. And we'll start off with the first fighter, pound for pound number 1, Islam Makhachev. Now, Makhachev's fun in multiple ways. First of all, it's the fact that he can mix up the striking with the grappling better than some Dagestanis can. He's got some of the best striking for a Dagestani fighter, and just in the lightweight division in general, and the fact that he makes it look so effortless every single time, whether he's striking or whether he's grappling. And there's just something about watching the best fighter in the world every time and how he just manhandles a lot of these lightweights. It's one of the most entertaining styles to watch, and on top of it as well, it's also the fact that Makhachev, if he's not finishing fighters early, which he usually tends to do because of his high finishing rate, he's having fight of the year contenders. The Volkanovski fight was a fight of the year contender. The Dustin Poirier fight, where he actually finished Poirier, was even a fight of the year contender there. So he's either in fight of the year contenders or he's getting the job done early, and you just can't hate a style like that. So compared to the rest of the Dagestani fighters, I'm putting Makhachev straight in S tier. He's one of the funnest Dagestanis in the UFC. Like I said before, again, it's the fact that he is the best fighter in the world, and you know you're watching the best fighter in the world, and it shows in his performances. So Makhachev, pound for pound number 1, instantly going to get an S tier for this. Then we've got Shamil Gaziev, the real deal of the heavyweight division. Now, Shamil, I feel like Shamil's natural style is quite fun. He comes with like a pressure-heavy boxing style, and if he can get his hands going, it tends to be quite fun. We just saw him knock out Thomas Peterson. We've seen him rough people up like Martin Badai with his boxing before, but I feel like when his boxing doesn't work, his plan B can be quite boring, where it is genuinely just lay down on people. You know, I'm a heavy guy, let me lay down on people, get the control time, and it seems to work for Shamil Gaziev because the guy's, I mean, big is an understatement for Shamil Gaziev. The guy's gigantic for the heavyweight division. You know what I mean? He's huge. So he just uses his weight to kind of hold people down. But that tends to be a plan B for Shamil Gaziev. So I'm going to put him in B tier. I think Shamil Gaziev and B tier is fair. He's got a good pressure boxing style. His gas tank lets him down a little bit in his secondary style of kind of just laying on people and pushing people up against the cage. It's not an entertaining style to watch. So the fact that Shamil Gaziev doesn't really have the consistency, but again, we've only seen him in a couple of fights in the UFC. He's going to be fighting Sergey Spivak soon, which is fun, and I think he will use his boxing against Sergey Spivak. So Shamil Gaziev, personality-wise, S tier, but I'm going to have to put him in B tier. But I do think there's a part of Shamil Gaziev that's kind of purposely trying to be a bit boring so that he can make the other Dagestani fighters look better, because that's how humble he is. Next fighter, Nassourdine Imavov. I know he's kind of French Dagestani, but he's got Dagestani roots as Nassourdine Imavov. Listen, I'm counting him as a Dagestani fighter for now. Nassourdine Imavov's got a fun style. He likes to strike. He's a stand-up guy. He just knocked out Israel Adesanya, which I never saw coming. Even if he beat Adesanya, I wouldn't have predicted it by knockout. So he's got a fun stand-up style where he kind of just walks forward, applies the pressure with the striking. He's got really good anti-grappling as well for the welterweight, for the middleweight division. And he's just overall a fairly solid striker. He's not, like, the thing about Nassourdine Imavov is it's not like he's got something we've never seen before. He hasn't got an unbelievable striking style that looks unstoppable. We've seen him get 50-45 by Sean Strickland before. I know he just knocked out Israel Adesanya, but I can see him having problems with the likes of Caio Borralho and maybe like a Dricus du Plessis and some of the other guys. So I'm going to put Nassourdine Imavov in A tier. He isn't one of the highest level fighters in the UFC. He hasn't got a completely unreal, like insane style that you've never seen before. He's just got a fairly solid and effective striking style with a good anti-grappling base, where he ends up kind of just roughing people up. We saw when he finished Cannonier as well. Dangerous striker, obviously hits pretty hard, good technical striker. I'm going to put him in A tier. He's not one of the most entertaining fighters in the UFC, but he's definitely a fun guy to watch. You can't call him a boring fighter, so I'm going to put Imavov in the A tier. Then we've got Movsar Evloev, one of the, I think, the few undefeated Dagestani fighters still remaining in the UFC. These undefeated Dagestani seem to be a bit of a dying breed, but Evloev isn't one of them. One of the top contenders of the featherweight division. Evloev's got a very grappling-heavy style, and I feel like Evloev, he's one of the funner grapplers in the UFC. I thought his fight with Aljamain Sterling, for the fact that it was such a back-and-forth grappling fight, was fun, and we've seen him in fights before, like the fight with Arnold Allen and Diego Lopez, where they were so close that it was actually an entertaining fight. Now, I do think Evloev, I like the fact that he does mix it up with the striking a little bit. He has got quite athletic striking, and he does like to take the fight to the mat, and he has got really effective wrestling, one of the best wrestlers in the lower weight classes. So for Movsar Evloev, I'm going to put him in B tier as well. He's not a boring fighter. I wouldn't call Evloev boring, but I also wouldn't call him entertaining. If I was to go through that featherweight division and go through some entertaining fighters, Evloev wouldn't make the list because he's not really someone that you tend to see in barn burners on a regular basis. But at the same time, I wouldn't call him boring either just because he has a heavy wrestling game plan, because even though he has got a heavy wrestling game plan, he makes it fun, as he showed against Sterling, as he showed against Lopez, as he showed against Arnold Allen. He's allowed his opponents to make the fight fun. So I'm going to put Movsar Evloev in the B tier. Then we've got Umar Nurmagomedov, guy who just lost to the belt, lost in a title fight to Merab. Umar Nurmagomedov. I think Umar is probably the highest level Dagestani in the UFC. So from a high level perspective, it's definitely fun to watch Umar because he's just a technician. When he fought Corey Sandhagen, when he fought Merab Dvalishvili, these fights are so high level in the bantamweight division that there's always some element of entertainment there when you know you're watching some of the highest level fights in the UFC. You're never going to see Umar in one of these back and forth scraps like an Islam Makhachev, but I do like how Umar likes mixing it up with the striking. He's got effective boxing. He seems to have a little bit of power on the feet, a little bit of, somewhat on the feet. And he has got a very wrestling-heavy approach. Now, I do think Umar's lack of finishing ability on the ground definitely contributes to his entertainment factor. And the fact that I think the last time he got a finish must have been back in like 2022 or something, when he fought like, I don't know, it's been a while since he got a finish. It might have been Brian Kelleher the last time he got a finish, which was like 4 fights ago. So for Umar Nurmagomedov, I'm also going to put him in B tier. I think he's an entertaining fighter from the fact that he's so high level, and he is one of the highest level Dagestanis in the UFC. I think he's got potential to be a champion in the future. He's got a good striking base, he's got a good grappling base, but unlike an Islam Makhachev and a Nassourdine Imavov, you don't really see Umar knocking these guys out at the highest level. We haven't really seen him against much high level guys. He's not even the best wrestler in his own weight class, and he's not really a finishing machine either. So for Umar, very technical fighter, not a boring fighter, but I'm going to put him in B tier in terms of entertainment. Then we've got Magomed Ankalaev, the new light heavyweight champion of the world. Ankalaev, listen, I'm never going to choose to watch an Ankalaev fight back if I have the option. I think his grappling style compared to a lot of Dagestanis is a little bit, uneventful. It is kind of just holding people against the cage, and when he was able to take Jan Blachowicz down, he didn't really do anything. He's never had a single submission in his career. He's got effective striking, but again, he doesn't really take too many risks on the feet, which has worked because he's a champion, but from an entertainment perspective, he's not one of the funnest strikers. He's not one of the most crafty, wicked strikers in the UFC. Ankalaev has a very well-rounded, low-risk style that has worked at helping him become a champion. But if we're going to rank it from entertainment, I'm going to put him in C tier. I think the fact that he is in such a heavier weight class at light heavyweight, it makes it harder to be as entertaining because you can't be as athletic, you can't be as, flashy as the smaller Dagestani fighters. But I do think he's got a bit of a boring style as Magomed Ankalaev, and I'm not going to sit here and bullshit. I know he's had finishes before. He knocked out Johnny Walker. He finished Anthony Smith, but it's Anthony Smith at the end of the day. But there has been some fights where he looks kind of uneventful. The fight with Jan Blachowicz was a boring title fight. The fight that he just had with Alex Pereira was a bit of a boring title fight. I'm not just blaming Ankalaev for that, as I discussed in the video yesterday, but he hasn't got one of the funnest styles in the UFC. The fight with Nikita Krylov wasn't awfully fun as well, so I'm going to put Magomed Ankalaev in C tier. I wouldn't choose to watch a Magomed Ankalaev fight. I would never get excited for his fight, and I do think he's a bit of a boring fighter compared to the rest of the Dagestanis, just because he doesn't really tend to take that many risks. And before everyone starts saying, oh, he was striking with Poton, what do you mean he's not taking risks? He is predominantly a striker who has grappling in his back pocket, so it isn't like, he was only striking with Poton because he wanted to take the risk. But anyway, Magomed Ankalaev, I'm going to stick him in C tier. I just can't lie, I don't find him that entertaining. Then we've got Shara Magomedov. Never going to be a champion, just lost to MVP, but he's a unique Dagestani because he's one of the few Dagestanis in the world that actually can't wrestle. I mean, he was getting held up against the cage by one-dimensional MVP. Shara Magomedov is like a kickboxer we haven't seen before. Some of the craftiest kicks in the UFC, from his first fight with Bruno Silva to that double spinning back fist KO against Arman Petrosian. Shara Magomedov, I'm fine if he doesn't become a champion or a top fighter. As long as we get to see him in these fun striking matchups, I'm happy. He's got some of the best kicks in the UFC. He's so crafty with his kicks. His boxing does kind of lack. I know he had a spinning back fist knockout, but apart from his spinning back fist knockout, his boxing does kind of lack. It tends to be his kicking game. But if we see Shara Magomedov in similar fights as would against MVP, just fun stand-up fights, I'm cool with that, and I'm going to put him in S tier. You can't dislike a Shara Magomedov fight. His first fight with Bruno Silva was just an assault on Bruno Silva. His fight with Makal, his fight with who was the other guy, Antonio Chacole, those 3 fights were all assaults. His fight with Arman Petrosian was one of the best knockouts of 2024, and his fight with MVP was a high-level striking matchup. He's never been in a boring fight. He's got a fun style. If you put him against the right guy, he can assault them on the feet, and if it's not, it's going to be a high-level striking matchup. So for Shara Magomedov, even though he's very one-dimensional, from an entertainment perspective, I'm going to tune into his fights, and I'm going to enjoy every single one of them. I'm putting him in S tier for a Dagestani, one of the rare Dagestanis that actually can't grapple, and it's ironic how he's managed to make himself to an S tier. But anyway, next fighter on the list we've got is going to be Said Nurmagomedov. One of the kind of Dagestani fighters that goes under the radar. Similar to Shara Magomedov, he's not able to make it into the top 15, so I don't think anybody's looking at this guy as like a future champion. Said's got a fun style though. He's a very kind of elusive, athletic kickboxer. He likes using his kicking game early on in the fight, and it seems to be effective. He has got really good kicks, to be fair. He's also got good jiu-jitsu as well, so if you do want to take the fight to the mat, you've got to be worried about his Darce chokes and his guillotines, which he's always able to pull off. But I feel like as a kickboxer, he's a fun stand-up guy, so I thought that first round against Vinicius Oliveira in his most recent fight was really entertaining. entertaining. Now, there are a few things that let Saidina Magomedov down a little bit. You know, he hasn't got the most well-rounded base, but again, I don't think that necessarily takes away from him too much. But I also think his gas tank is awful. He can't really make it past the first round. He showed that in the fight with Vinicius Oliveira. But I actually think for side style, it makes him funny because you tend to see him in these much more vulnerable positions where the fight intensity is kind of increased, where you're seeing him completely gassed and swigging. So I think for sometimes Saidina Magomedov can put in a good performance. I'm going to put him in A tier. I'm a fan of Saidina Magomedov's style. Long, rangy, athletic kickboxer, very snappy kicks, and he just throws it all out there early on, and then he has nothing left in the gas tank later on. He's also got a threatening jiu-jitsu game too. One of the best unranked fighters in the bantamweight division, Saidina Magomedov. I'm going to put him in the A tier for entertainment from a Dagestani fighter. Then we've got Azamat Magomedov, talking of bad stamina. Azamat Magomedov's a similar fighter to Saidina Magomedov too. He's like a middleweight version of him. He's got really good kickboxing, does Azamat Magomedov. Really good kicks. His high kicks and his body kicks and even his teeps in the middleweight division are really good. Seems to be pretty hard hitting in this division too. Even against his fight with Sean Strickland, he was looking good against Strickland in that first round. He was piecing him up early on. It was only his gas tank that let him down. But I'm a fan of Azamat Magomedov. Fun striking style, and the fact that he does get gassed out so early can kind of make it a lot funny because he's so vulnerable. He's also got a decent jiu-jitsu game. He was losing that fight to Bruno for head, and that he was able to pull off a submission game too, so he has got grappling. I think his boxing and his kickboxing is fairly effective too. He's going to be taking on Michel Pereira. I think he has a really good chance of beating Michel Pereira. So for Azamat Magomedov, I'm going to put him in A tier too. I'm a fan of his style. Good kickboxer, fun kickboxer to watch. Again, doesn't have one of these over-the-top, insane striking styles, and he isn't one of the craftiest fighters in the UFC like a Shara Magomedov, but I'm not going to stop watching an Azamat Magomedov fight because even when he's completely gassed out, that's only going to make it a lot more vulnerable for him. So I'm going to put Azamat Magomedov in A tier. Fun stand-up guy, not a boring fighter, and I'm going to put him in A tier for that reason. Then we've got Tagir Ulanbekov, one of the few flyweight Dagestani fighters we've ever had in the UFC. Tagir Ulanbekov, it's a very simple game plan. He wants to take the fight to the mat. He wants to engage in clinching, and he wants to take the fight to the mat early. He's trained by the likes of Khabib and Makhachev, and I think he was trained by Abdulmanap a few years ago too. He likes to take the fight to the mat and look for submissions. That is his game plan. He has got a decent kickboxing game, to be fair. He can strike on the feet. He's not just completely one-dimensional, but his game plan is to take the fight to the mat early on. I just feel like Tagir Ulanbekov has never really had any memorable or notable moments throughout his UFC career. When there's a Tagir Ulanbekov fight, nobody's really getting excited, and he's in one of the lighter weight classes as well, where he has the opportunity to display that lighter man skill. I'm going to put Ulanbekov in the same tier as Ankalaev. I'm just not a massive fan of Ulanbekov's style. I feel like you can put him against a fun fighter and he managed to make it boring. Again, I'm not just saying this because he's a grappler, but you look at his fights, he's got decent stand-up, but he does nothing effective on the feet. He gets people in the clinch, takes the fight to the mat, racks up the control time, might threat a couple of submissions, and get a decision win most of the time. But for that reason, I'm going to put him in C tier. Isn't that entertaining to watch? I think he is one of the duller flyweights in the top 15, and I'm not going to lie, I do think he's a bit of a boring fighter. So Tagir Ulanbekov is going to make C tier. Then we've got Azamat Murzakanov, who's just been suspended for steroids. Now, Azamat Murzakanov, despite the steroids, or maybe the steroids actually made him entertaining, because I actually think he's got quite a fun style. He had this very dangerous, heavy pressure boxing style, or just striking style, where he'd pressure people and kind of just like a Sergey Pavlovich of the light heavyweight division, just unload on people with his heavy boxing and his heavy hands. And it worked. He was knocking people out. He was sparking people out left, right, and center. He was one of the hardest hitting guys in the light heavyweight top 15. He was actually a decent prospect as well, undefeated in this division. And I was excited to see Azamat Murzakanov when he had the fight booked against Nikita Krylov. I was really looking forward to that fight. He's got a decent gas. I mean, he hasn't got a great gas tank. He can go about 2 rounds and then he'll gas out. But for Azamat Murzakanov, I'm going to put him in A tier. He's a knockout machine in the light heavyweight division. He can knock people out. If he lands flush on somebody, they're going to sleep. Again, that's probably heavily due to the steroids, but listen, we're not going to be judging him for the steroids. We're judging him based on entertainment. Even if the steroids are having something to do with him, with his entertainment factor, it's only going to contribute to this list. So Azamat Murzakanov, unironically one of the funnest light heavyweights on the roster because of how dangerous his hands are. I'm going to put him in A tier. One of the best first round fighters out of all the Dagestanis. Then we've got Roman Kopylov. I know there's been stuff going around that Roman Kopylov isn't really from Dagestan, but I'm counting him as a Dagestani fighter. Roman Kopylov, I mean, this guy is one of the funnest kickboxers, not only just funnest, but one of the best kickboxers in the middleweight division. He's got knockout ability. I remember that, I think it was a 4-fight first and second round knockout streak. He just completely breaks people down on the feet with his kickboxing. Kicks to the body, head kicks up top, and he hits like a fucking truck as well. His knockout ability. He was able to crack the chin of Chris Curtis multiple times. It's very rare that you see Roman Kopylov in a stand-up fight and he's getting outdone in a stand-up fight. He pieces up most people most of the time. He's flashy on the feet as well. He likes to keep it flashy. He's a very crafty kickboxer. Mixes it up really well with his boxing and his kickboxing, and most of the time he's slaughtering people in the UFC. I remember his fight with Chris Curtis a couple of weeks back, where he absolutely pieced up Chris Curtis for 3 rounds straight, and then eventually knocked him out in the last minute. So Roman Kopylov is getting a straight ST. I look forward to Roman Kopylov fights. I don't know if he's got a fight booked. I know he's in the top 15. I don't know if he has a fight booked, but Roman Kopylov is one of the best kickboxers in the middleweight division. I think he pieces up a Paulo Costa, and I just like the style of Roman Kopylov. He's not just a power merchant where he relies on his power. He genuinely goes out there, pieces people up with his kickboxing, and then eventually when they've got nothing left, he'll land a big shot and put them to sleep. He's one of the best knockout artists in the middleweight division out of all the Dagestani fighters. He's like Shara Magomedov if Shara Magomedov was a little bit more patient but had 10 times the power. So for Roman Kopylov, he's getting a straight ST. One of the funnest fighters to watch. He's a little bit one-dimensional. His grappling isn't the best, but to be fair, that's only really been exposed by Anthony Hernandez, who's one of the best grapplers in the middleweight division. So Roman Kopylov's getting a straight ST. Then we've got Magomed Ghadziasulov. Magomed Ghadziasulov's just a bit of a dull fighter in the light heavyweight division. His grappling isn't amazing. He's not one of the best grapplers, so his grappling does just tend to be a lot of holding people against the cage. He is a very one-dimensional Dagestani fighter, and even when he's striking, apart from front kicks to the body, he does tend to get gassed out really quickly. He's got good teeps, good head kicks for the light heavyweight division, and then he's completely gassed out for the rest of the fight, where you see him with this very sloppy striking approach, this, just lazy clinch game where he gets people in a bit of a clinch. He is a little bit vulnerable, which I guess can add to the entertainment factor, but Magomed Ghadziasulov, he's just not fun anywhere the fight goes. I'm going to put him in the first category put him in the first D tier category. Yeah, he's just not fun. His striking isn't fun. He gets gassed out too quickly and it just becomes sloppy. He's not powerful. He hasn't got great submissions. He's not a great grappler either. He isn't great anywhere the fight goes. I think he's 1-1 in the UFC as well. Magomed Ghadziasulov, I'm going to stick him in D tier. I don't look forward to his fights. He's not dangerous. He's not a prospect. He hasn't got a fun style. There's no reason why I would ever look forward to a Magomed Ghadziasulov fight. Then we've got the king of Kung Fu, Muslim Salikhov. This guy's an OG Dagestani. He was a Dagestani fighter before Dagestanis were popular. Since Khabib joined the UFC, we've seen this new wave of Dagestanis. Muslim Salikhov's an OG. Muslim Salikhov, for 40 years of age, has some of the best taekwondo and kickboxing in the division. He has probably the best spinning wheel kick in the UFC. He had that wheel kick over Song Kanan at UFC Macau, and it was one of the best knockouts of 2024. And that isn't the first spinning wheel kick KO he's had before. He's one of the best kickboxers and one of the best taekwondo artist in the the middleweight division. No, it's a welterweight division, and it's just so fun to see. The guy's 40 years of age, throwing up kicks like a prime Umar Nurmagomedov. I'm just a massive fan of Muslim Salikhov. I look forward to his fights. You can tell he is 40 years of age. He hasn't got the best, he hasn't got the best kind of reaction time. He hasn't got the best movements. He does get caught quite a bit, does Muslim Salikhov. But on his best day, Muslim Salikhov just goes out there and straight pieces people up. So I'm going to put Muslim Salikhov in this A tier. He isn't consistent enough. He does get kind of gassed out a lot of the time. And you can kind of tell that he's 40 years old. And he does kind of look for shots a lot. He isn't like a Roman Kopylov where he's just straight piecing people up for 3 rounds straight. But on his good day, when Muslim Salikhov lands that spinning wheel kick and gets a good knockout, or he just lands a good combination, it's a fun thing to see from a striking fan. So Muslim Salikhov at 40 years of age is going to make it to the A tier. Then we've got Ikram Aliskerov. I've been waiting for Ikram Aliskerov to fight. I'm pretty sure he's booked to, I don't know when he is booked, to be fair. I know he's going to be taking on Andre Muniz. I forgot which card it's on. But either way, Ikram Aliskerov, very fun fighter to watch because he's a very hard-hitting guy and he's so well-rounded, he's Ikram Aliskerov. I thought he was one of the best prospects in the middleweight division before losing to Ritika. Very hard-hitting middleweight. He's got knockout ability on the feet. He showed that in both his fights in the middleweight division against Wally Alves and Phil Hall. So he knows what he's doing from a striking perspective, and he's still a good prospect, to be fair. He's only lost to Khamzat Chimaev and Robert Whittaker. When it comes to grappling, he's got grappling too. Really good wrestling and jiu-jitsu, so he can take the fight to the mat. He's very well-rounded, he's Ikram Aliskerov, and I do think he was one of the funnest prospects to watch in the middleweight division. For that reason, I'm going to put him straight in S tier. I've been waiting for Aliskerov to fight. I think he's really fun because of how dangerous he is everywhere the fight goes. He's one of the most dangerous Dagestani fighters in the UFC right now. I don't see Ikram Aliskerov going to a decision during his UFC career, and I can see it hard for him to go to a decision because of just how dangerous he is everywhere the fight goes. Hard hitting on the feet, good striker, good wrestling ability where he's got really good jiu-jitsu and good submissions, as he showed in the Contender Series 2. Only lost to Whittaker and Chimaev, so he's still a good prospect in the middleweight division. Ikram Aliskerov has everything going for him. I'm going to stick him in S tier. Fun, dangerous fighter, mixes it up well. Very rare that you're going to see Ikram Aliskerov in a boring fight. Then we've got Rizvan Kuniev, who was supposed to fight Curtis Blades at UFC 313 and ended up pulling out, but now that he's part of the UFC roster, I thought I'd count him in this video now. He didn't pull out, it was Curtis Blades who pulled out, but still. Rizvan Kuniev, He's got decent stand-up. He has got decent stand-up. He's got good teeps to the body, as he's shown in the Contender Series fight. But to be fair to him, he was fighting a complete can in the Contender Series, so there's not much I can really base off that. If you go back to his fights in PFL, it was a very boring style. It was kind of just him laying on head for header for 15 minutes straight. He has got a bit of a boring kind of grappling heavy approach where he just wants to wrap up control time. He doesn't really look for submission. He doesn't really look for damage. On the feet, he's got the bare minimum going for him as well. Rizvan Kuniev, I'm going to put him in C tier. He is a bit of a boring fighter. Maybe the fight with Curtis Blades would have been different because Blades would have absolutely destroyed him because of the step up in competition, or maybe Kuniev could have showed us something we haven't seen. But based off what I've seen before in the Contender Series and in PFL, he didn't really seem to have a fun style. Just grappling heavy, lay on people, don't really try to get the submissions, don't look for the damage, lay people, get the control time, and that's all his game plan really was. So Rizvan Kuniev is going to get struck straight to C tier. Just not really that fun of a fighter. Now we're going to go through some former Dagestani fighters in the UFC who can also make the list. Starting off with quite possibly the most popular and successful Dagestani fighter, Khabib Nurmagomedov. Now, what made Khabib fun was how dominant he was. Now, you're not going to see Khabib Nurmagomedov in Fight of the Year contenders like he did with Islam Makhachev. You're not going to see him in back and forth scraps and barn burners. But that was just because he didn't allow people to. He's one of the best wrestlers, the most dominant wrestlers we've ever seen in the UFC. Every single time he wanted to take somebody to the mat, everybody knew what he wanted to do and nobody could stop it. His wrestling was so dominant. We talk about how good of a grappler that Makhachev was, and to put in perspective that Khabib was a much better grappler than Islam Makhachev just shows how good a wrestler he was. The fact that he could dominate everybody, manhandle everyone, the fact that he was so dominant for the lightweight division, for that reason, I'm going to put Khabib straight into A tier. Now, again, you're not going to see him in these Fight of the Year contenders. You're not going to see any flashy things on the feet from Khabib. He wasn't a great striker, but just simply from how dominant his grappling was alone, and the fact that you're watching the most dominant fighter, or at least one of the most dominant wrestlers in UFC history, where nobody could do a thing about Khabib no matter who it was, I'm going to put him in A tier for that reason. So dominant, consistent, undefeated. Again, I know people like to call him boring because of his style, but when you really just put into perspective the fact that he's just ragdolling and manhandling everyone, and he is a busy grappler as well. He's not just one of these lay and pray grapplers that goes for control time. When he takes you down, he's looking for the submission, and he will get it. And if you stop him from getting the submission, which is a rare thing to do, he's going to absolutely beat the brakes off you with ground and pound, and he has the ability to maul people. So Khabib Nurmagomedov, I'm putting him straight in A tier. Then we've got Zabit Magomedsharipov. Yeah, this guy was one of the biggest what-ifs in the UFC, retired when he was doing great. Zabit is one of the most, not only just for a Dagestani, but just in general, one of the flashiest strikers we've ever seen in the UFC. He was never just a normal basic striker. He always had to mix it up in the feet. He'd always throw some stupid shit in the octagon that seemed to be effective as well because it landed on people. It wasn't even just his striking as well. He had really unique takedowns. He was one of the most unique, crafty fighters in UFC history. His kicks up high, these combinations with his kicks, jumping off the cage like he's Anthony Pettis. Zabit Magomedsharipov is one of a kind when it comes to fighters in the UFC, not only just Dagestani fighters, and I'm going to have to stick him straight in S tier. One of my favourite fighters to ever watch in the UFC. His fights with the likes of Jeremy Stevens and Calvin Kattar, when he was just able to mix it up so good. He did have a problem with the gas tank. His stamina was pretty awful, which kind of meant after the second round, he couldn't really still go with that kind of, that crafty shit. But in the first couple of rounds, first 3 rounds at least, he'd be so effective with that crafty striking, and he'd just be so unique and unorthodox. And for that reason, because it's like nobody we've ever seen before, but it was still effective, and he was doing well with that style, I'm going to put Zabit in S tier. Then we've got Askar Askarov. Again, one of the flyweights that kind of just disappeared out of nowhere. He did take a loss to Kara France, but he still had a lot of potential. Askarov had a decent striking style. He was a powerful guy on the feet in the flyweight division. He had really good stand-up, but he also had really good grappling as well. He had decent fight IQ, where if you're going to put him against a dangerous strike, he's going to implement the grappling, which seemed to be quite effective. His wrestling wasn't one of the best wrestling you'd see for like a Dagestani fighter, but he did have a decent wrestling base, but he was just so good at mixing the striking up with the grappling, which is why he became one of the top flyweights in the world, and somehow just decided to retire from the UFC, or at least leave the UFC in his prime. But I'm going to put Askarov, I'm going to put him in B tier. Again, you're never going to see him in one of these barn burners. He wasn't necessarily an entertaining fighter. I wouldn't sit here and say that he's extremely fun to watch, but I also wouldn't call him boring. He mixes it up with the grappling and the striking. Isn't anything overly entertaining. Isn't anything overly boring. I think for Askarov, a B tier is a fairly, it's a fair representation of how fun he's of a fighter. But that is my tier list for Dagestani fighters in the UFC and how entertaining they are, both historically and as of right now. Let me know if you agree with this list. If you'd have changed any placements, let me know your thoughts. Thank you for watching.